thanks so much for joining us today. It's actually amazing how many of you are here so early. I think it's the busiest our office has ever been at this time. We're going to be talking a little bit about like how legacy businesses are like moving to keep up with startups, a little bit of the ways of like why you might join them, what the benefits are, how you can hire for them, and dig into that a little bit with two different discussions and then round off with a group discussion as well. It's really exciting to have a room full of people who are passionate about product and also about creating the teams that allow product people to thrive. Who we are, we're Planes. We are a digital product studio. We build and launch thoughtful product-led businesses, and how our teams split up. We're product managers, designers, developers. There's people like me in ops. And we kind of go in as a ready-to-go product team for our clients, and that ranges from startups, scale-ups, and large-scale businesses too. So we've kind of seen it from beginning to end for these kind of different scale businesses, and that's kind of where I've come in a little bit as well, is helping advise on how they can hire and grow their teams. Who we have with us today? We have Ben, who runs co-founds Found by Few. They are a next-gen recruitment agency. You've got Becki, who heads up product at ETC. That is a incubator for BT. We got Yshira, she's a senior PM at Lego, and we got Serena, who is a PM at GoCardless. What we've kind of seen over the last few years is startups have kind of had that hook of being an exciting place for PMs. But more and more, as larger organisations recognise the opportunity in product and start to build great teams and processes around it, we think it's time that is starting to be like a very exciting thing to join too. So yeah, we're going to get digging in, and first up we have Ben and Becki. We're going to start with kind of a chunky question, which are like, what are the challenges of hiring a product team at a legacy business?
Am I starting first?
Either or. Whoever wants to take the...
all right, so I guess just to give context, obviously I run a recruitment company, and we specialise in posting product people. We work with startups, we work with agencies, we work with FTSE 100 businesses, and we work with big European businesses as well. So I guess I'm here anecdotally to give the voice of the candidate between those people that work in startups and maybe some of the concerns they have when they join bigger businesses, and equally perhaps people that have been in bigger businesses and now want to leave and join startups. So I guess the three big challenges, and Becki, maybe you can kind of like answer these. I can give you what the concerns are.
Of course.
Are I guess when people join a bigger business, the concern is always like, does this company do product properly? And I think that's something that bigger businesses always have to, communicate and go out of their way to explain to candidates looking to join. I think along with, do they do product properly? I think people are always worried about joining a big business for the pace that it moves at, and also whether they're going to be on a product for maybe a year, maybe even 2 years, and then that product doesn't even see the light of day. So I think that's a concern as well. And I think up until recently, I think always salary. Startups are very different businesses. They get funding, they're working towards getting their next round of funding, so they tend to have a lot of cash, less worried about the margins perhaps in a bigger business. So like for a lot of last year, a lot of people were concerned whether they would get paid the same amount of money in a bigger business than they would do in a startup. Perhaps already in this year, perhaps those concerns are less so. But yeah, I'd say they're the three main concerns that we hear from candidates when we're approaching them about a bigger business.
Nice. And Becki, what would you say, like, as someone who's like had to hire and grow product teams, like?
Yeah, I'd agree with all of those three things. I think there's also the element of recently as well in the kind of product ecosystem, I guess vision and values for the business is holding arguably, I'd say, stronger than what it ever has before. So as a product person who wants to arguably, I think we all want to change the world in some aspect, right? And we want to work on these kind of products that sit close to our hearts and kind of build something and change and make waves. I think that's kind of one of the challenges, I think, when you're trying to bring people in terms of a big company, is kind of explaining, okay, yes, you are part of this legacy business. Obviously there is, these constructs that sit around it, but also, the work that we're doing is good work. And it's trying to find out, I think, and kind of articulate, changing the world, changing someone's world. How do you kind of bring those two things together? I think I'd talk to, I suppose, the kind of the salary piece as well. We know that a paycheck does matter, that is, especially, today, cost of living crisis, all of those things. The one thing I would say is don't underestimate coming into a big business and kind of the package that offers and the safety and the security. I think it's very easy to look at a base salary, and it may be slightly under what some of the kind of the competitors were maybe looking to pay, sometimes not, but also what is that in the round and for how long. I also think, to that point around, doing product properly is a really interesting one. And it's something that I've seen. I've been in product for about sort of 9-10 years now, and I've worked in different businesses. I've worked in government, I've worked in large corporates, currently obviously with a telco, but an incubator within a telco. And I've also worked in a scale up. And I would say that all of those different businesses have a different view of product, right? And it's actually down to the team that comes in and giving people the kind of the ownership and the accountability to actually create their own product cycles, which is where kind of the real change happens. Big businesses are good for giving you the tools and kind of the funding to be able to go out there and make the change that you want to see. And I definitely see that within kind of etc. where we are today, is we've had to build this business unit from scratch, right? We sit as part of a digital function, which is going through this digital transformation. We're on this, what they call telco to techco journey, which is something I was also at Vodafone previously doing a very similar thing, and that was the language that was used there as well. So are there kind of roadblocks you have to overcome? Absolutely, but with the right kind of stakeholder mindset, with the right kind of ambition, and also proof in the pudding, in terms of, what you can deliver, it's getting those stakeholders on board to be able to kind of, give you the tools that you need. And I wouldn't say necessarily that it's any different from a challenge you might see within a startup where you actually have to do all of those things anyway, but maybe with only a smaller percentage of kind of the funding and the ability to do so.
I think the salary thing's interesting because you actually probably get larger benefits, and probably the package probably adds up to more than a startup usually, because that hasn't really been like bottomed out as much. So having, I guess, more inclusive policies in a sense too, because they normally have things like childcare or like long maternity leave or like parental and all that kind of stuff. And you touched on like security too, which is huge.
It's a really interesting one. Yeah, it's a really interesting one because I think so. Like I said, I used to work at Vodafone, and they had one of the best kind of parental policies that I've ever seen. It was something like 9 months maternity cover with a buyback agreement, which was about 30% of your salary. That's unheard of. I went from Vodafone into a startup, and everything was around kind of statutory rights, which also brings up a bigger question around diversity in your product teams, right? And I think looking at a startup and how you look to grow that team is very different, because you arguably might have a slightly larger pool or a different pool of candidates that you can choose from. Maybe people who do product a bit more the way that we, like I like to say, product the right way, right? However, when you get to that point of kind of signing a contract, you lose good people for obvious reasons. And that then makes kind of the diversity kind of line a bit harder to cross. And that's something that I'm super passionate about, and I think is super important. And I think as product people in this audience, we know the importance of having diversity when you build products for everyone, and especially when you build products for a global scale. So I would agree with that, yeah.
Yeah. And what do you think like the biggest misconceptions are about like legacy businesses? Because I think you kind of touched on that, and like flexibility and learning paths and those kind of avenues that I don't think people get as much exposure to, and especially like incubators like yourself, like people might not have heard about them. So I think there's a big misconception that they're always just like slow moving and might not have as...
Yeah, I think the biggest misconceptions are normally that like, so we've got startups and we've got bigger legacy businesses, that one person's good at one thing, that it's binary and it makes the other person bad at the other, which just isn't the case. And me and Becki have had this discussion before where a lot of the issues that people have with how things are done actually straddle both types of businesses. So if we go to, I don't want to join a big business and work on a product for two years that never sees the light of day, but you could equally join a startup that goes bust after 2 years, doesn't get their next round of funding, and that product never sees the light of day. So it can happen in both places, but in different ways. I guess then, people say, oh, like product's not done properly in a bigger business. Well, then we also hear the same complaint from startups that, we've got a CEO that is telling us exactly what we need to do, and actually we don't get much input, and actually we just need to listen to the CEO and take direction from them. So again, it's I think while we're having this discussion today, it's not a binary choice that one is bad and the other's good. It's just that they're both kind of different in their own ways. And yeah, I would, just touch on the salary and the package. Yeah, Vodafone do some really amazing stuff. And I think candidates were right to kind of like, be really drawn in by big base salaries because, London's a really expensive city. And if you don't live in London, England, Britain is a really expensive place to live. That base salary affects what house you buy. So for everyone, that's really, really important. But I do think that bigger company, because a lot of people, they've only ever grown up in startups don't really have much benefits. People don't really pay any attention to it. So they don't really care, they don't really know about it. I think it's now down to bigger companies to communicate what that benefits package really means and what it looks like for employees and what, there's so many companies that I know that just don't sell their benefits package. And I admit last year that was hard. But I do think this year that bigger companies, it's on them to sell that package to make sure that the candidate understands how it affects them.
I'd also just add benefits, and the way that I view benefits and the way that I communicate benefits is more than just kind of financial benefits. We have to take into account kind of growth opportunities. You have to take into account the ability to learn from a vast variety of kind of colleagues in different positions. I will also say that I have learnt multiple different techniques from being in big business and then also being in small business. In small business, you get more visibility over some of those hard decisions that are being made. You're arguably less protected by some of those kind of, by the cadence or the waterfall down the chain. And that can be a good thing, right? But it can also mean that it takes you away from being able to kind of focus in and laser focus and do your job. I would say that the more I have learnt in different ways, I've learnt from bigger businesses with being able to do, the level of stakeholder management you have to have, the visibility that you also see when your product is out in the wild, working at larger scale, touching more and more people. Now, that doesn't mean that it's any better than being at a small business, but it does mean that a lot of those skills that you can take into smaller businesses and obviously grow your career perhaps at a different pace. Like Ben said, there's not one that's better than the other necessarily. I personally have learnt things from both. I think a lot of my team, within etc., 60% of our kind of headcount, we're about 150 now, have come from a startup background or a scale-up background. So, there is a way to disrupt from within. You can bring a lot of those skills and that mindset. Just because you come into a legacy organisation doesn't mean that you have to do things the way that it's always been done. And I think it's a nice kind of complementary skill set perhaps to kind of be able to do both of those things. And I would advise as well for anyone in product, try both, see what works for you. And the culture can be different in either place. But I think your learning growth can complement each other across both sides.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point as well. If people don't know this, what a lot of legacy businesses do to try and move at the pace that a startup can do. Obviously, they'll probably never move quite as quick, but they create these incubators where they try to give these teams like their own tech channel, sometimes their own office, their own brand, so that you're, as I said, you're this kind of almost small startup within a bigger business. So that's some of the ways that people, or certainly legacy businesses, try to do product properly, I guess.
Yeah, and I think the interesting part of that is coming in as a kind of a startup from within, you end up changing far more than your immediate footprint. Whether that be, taking it into a bit more of a techie term, the CI/CD pipelines that the guys work to kind of actually build and kind of commit their code. We as etc. Are building kind of new infrastructure to support that perhaps the legacy side of the business hasn't used. So you're not only just affecting your kind of immediate team and your immediate processes, you're also actually having waves and creating impact through the rest of the business, which I think is equally important and something to kind of be really proud of.
Yeah, 100%. So if people don't know, I know Becki from startup and from big business, and I guess one of the things we touched on again is that like startups might have this this mission that you really want to be a part of. I know what Becki missed about bigger business was the impact she could have on millions of consumers. And again, they're kind of like the same things but slightly different. And I know that you could be in a mission up in a startup that is great, but when you go to a bigger business, wow, the impact you could have there is just as great and on millions of people. So I think it's super interesting. It's a really good point, Becki.
Yeah, and I think what you both kind of touched on there is how do these large scale businesses improve like employer brand, because it's like how do people get to know about these incubators, how does that become the selling point, how does that become really attractive thing that people can join and people can get excited about? Like, how did you find etc., or was it great when you?
Becky's that good. She got headhunted.
Yeah, it was a bit of it was a slightly different entry point for me. I kind of came across with a few people that I'd worked with previously. But, you know, that is a challenge. Going back to your kind of original question, you know, BT is not synonymous with kind of fast-paced growth and product. It's synonymous with network cables and, you know, so how do you kind of carve out, you know, a brand there? Well, etc. is actually the evolution of what used to be, I suppose, the incubation arm within BT Digital, and we still are there, except our goals and our ambitions are a lot larger than what they used to be. And so hence, you know, we wanted to curate and create the best talent. We then have kind of worked to create an employer band that kind of is more attractive to the types of people that we want to kind of bring on board. It happens a lot, you know. Vodafone were doing it while I was there. There's different parts of kind of different other legacy businesses which are doing the same. And I do think it is important because it all comes back to kind of the culture that you want to create. And culture for me is super important, as I think it is for most people, but definitely from a person that prioritises it. You know, culture doesn't start with, you know, beanbags and beer on a Friday. And I think a lot of people are drawn to kind of the startup lifestyle because of that, right? And those tactical kind of wins. The reality is culture starts from psychological safety and from knowing that you have the ability to kind of fail fast and learn. And that is one of the things that I think big business can offer you. You know, is it perfect all the time? Absolutely not. Do we have our failings? Absolutely we do. But I've also experienced those failings in smaller businesses, and you just don't have the same kind of safety net. And so, you know, if you do want to learn, if you want to grow, you know, big businesses create that environment for you to do that. And then, like I said before, you know, take that knowledge, take those learnings, go and smash it at a startup, learn some new things, get closer to kind of the business structure, because ultimately that'll help you in the long term if you want to come back to a legacy business.
Yeah, and you mentioned employer branding, like how does etc. How do these different like startups sort of get their employer brand out there, get candidates to know about who they are? I think last year that was just difficult for anybody. Even if you were one of the top startups last year, it was really noisy out there. It was very, very difficult to cut through that. And I guess this is why we're having this talk now, is that I do think that 2023 is a year where people like BT, etc., Vodafone, Tesco's can now really get out there and candidates will listen to them. Last year it was hard to get anyone to listen to you. Unless you were paying a hell of a lot of money, it was really difficult. But I do think that 2023 is going to be all about, there is a chance for, blue chip businesses, well-run businesses to get out there and start talking about what it is that they can offer candidates. And I guess, that's why we're here today, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. I've got my eye on the time, so I think maybe I'll open it up to the audience for any questions. Does anyone have anything that they'd like to ask? Yes.
So I'm a contractor, so I would love to know more about how a legacy business would be beneficial for a contractor, and like how do you make moves to get into a legacy business as a contractor?
Yeah, great question. I'll start by saying about 50% of kind of our headcount are contractors. It's quite common in the product ecosystem to have people that operate that way. I mean, I approach it the same way that I would approach kind of a permanent member of staff. You know, we work with some really talented agencies across our portfolio who specialise in kind of specialist roles like that. For me, there's not a difference between a contractor and a permanent employee. Again, it comes back to that culture piece. We run, you know, full end-to-end squad structures. So when you're coming in, you're part of the team. I don't care where you're coming from. I don't care if you're self-employed. I don't care if you're a permanent employee or you're part of an agency that we might be using to support that. So aside from, I suppose, the HR kind of sides to that, which are slightly different, getting a contractor in with, you know, everyone's favourite friend, IR35, it's if there's an opportunity that is kind of attractive to you, you know, we're looking for the best people out there, irrespective of kind of where you come from.
I may also be able to answer that. So we've got contractors in bigger businesses. I think if you do want to go into a bigger business as a contractor, I think you're way more likely to be found inside R35. So that's something just to bear in mind. When we have bigger companies that look for contractors, certainly product contractors, they kind of want to know that that you understand maybe how a bigger business works. If you've worked in a really small startup and that's where you've been contracting, I think they also just want to know that you I guess you can make things happen maybe a lot quicker in a smaller startup. They want to know that you can work within and understand, I think is the main thing, understand that a bigger business might not be able to work as quickly. There may be some things that take longer. And then also, if you do want to get into that area, I know bigger companies really tend to care about, you know, have you worked on a product that's in global markets? Have you worked on a product that's had a really big consumer base? So if there's any of that stuff that you can bring out in your CV, then I think that will be really helpful. But also, you know, on the flip side of that, you know, bigger businesses are crying out for people like you to come on board and bring the skills that you've got so they can learn from you. But at the same time, they want you to just be empathetic that they can't maybe move as quickly as some of the startups do. So they're probably the two biggest things to keep in mind.
Awesome. Marja, you have one? Yeah.
I'm moving from a startup to a bigger business as a product manager. And I was just wondering what you think the biggest challenges are that I might face when I start. I start on Monday. and
I won't say run then.
and if you have any advice on, how to get started in this way.
Yeah. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I hope it goes well. I think the first thing will be, have a landing plan. Understand what you're going to do when you kind of come in. For me and sort of my team, it's all about big businesses tend to operate best when it's kind of who you know and the relationships that you build. Especially if those kind of relationships mean that you might be building a product that requires another part of the business to sell it. Or they're your go-to-market channel or various other things. From a product point of view, you're going to want to understand that. You're going to want to get closer to those customers, right? So I think the best bit is on day one, ask who you need to talk to, right? Learn all of the people that are going to help you with your day job and get your personal brand out there, because ultimately you want to be the person that those people are thinking about when they're in another conversation in another part of the business. I'd also say kind of try and understand from a more operational side, what are the tools that the business uses, understand what your team uses, but also how does the rest of the business communicate, and kind of get up to speed with that. And then I would just say, you've been hired for a reason, so just smash it as you always would. That's probably from my point of view.
Yeah, I think Becky's definitely probably better placed than me to answer that question. But if I kind of think when we call up a manager at the end of the week and we say, like, how was this person's first week? I think if you can demonstrate proactivity with what Becki just said, like going to meet people, putting into meetings in diaries just to get some face time, like that will really put you in good stead. And then like Becki said, probably be understanding there's probably quite a lot of tools, there's probably some process, your onboarding might take a little while. But yeah, if you can be proactive in your first week, then that will look really good.
I would also say, don't rush it, right? I think there's a natural ability, I think, from two sides. One, from a product person, because we're naturally proactive. We naturally want to get under the skin of something that you want to kind of go in at full speed, right? I'd say don't rush that process, right? Big businesses are complicated. They're complex. They're political in some cases, right? So take your time to really understand that. And the second thing would be, I think that's going to be larger also from coming from a startup or a smaller business, where there's almost that expectation that you come in and need to hit the ground running. Now, that might be true within a bigger business, but there will be a little bit more breathing room, right? And the expectation from your management team will be to take a step back, breathe, understand what's going on so that you can really propel forward in future. So just take your time. You don't need to smash it out of the park on day one or week one. Make sure you set those foundations and you'll be good as gold.
That's what I was going to say. Be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
People rush and it gets hectic, and you don't want to burn out in your first couple of weeks.
Exactly.
Everyone knows it's a learning curve, and I think being proactive, being friendly, asking people to explain to you how they do things, and
ask the dumb questions.
Yeah, just be interested in what people do. I think that's the best way to build relationships. Speak to them about your experiences, build that trust up, have some vulnerability, say you're new. All those things are really nice to get a good level of trust. Nice. Any other questions? If not, I think we're at time to move on. But thanks so much, you two.
No worries. Thank you.
Yeah. now we're going to scoot on to the second one, which is actually about what it's actually like to be in those bigger places, why you would join them, and we're going to touch on Yshira's and Serena's experience and why they decided to join a large-scale business. So yeah, I'll start off with the largest question, which is, what is it actually like working in a brilliant product team at a big business? And either of you can kick off.
I'm happy to start. So I'll speak a little bit about like the learning opportunities in the first instance. Like I come from a lot of big companies. I started like, it's not that I have a huge like amount of experience. I started at a scale up, but much of my experience comes from like working in like these big corporate type companies. I think for me, it's a lot around the learning opportunities in terms of like honing a particular skill set. That's been a big thing that I've managed to achieve when working at particular industries or big corporate companies. I think as product managers, when we work in startups or scale-ups, we tend to cover like a huge breadth of stuff. Whereas when we're in the big corporate companies, we have the ability, or at least the opportunity, to kind of dive into a little bit like, in depth into stuff. And so that opportunity to come in, to have that narrower remit, meant that I was able to kind of focus in on a particular like skill set that I otherwise wanted to kind of leverage up. Like, specifically at Lego, I was looking at like discovery as a big thing, as wanting to kind of improve upon. At previous companies, discovery looked a little different. It was like a centralized model. As product manager, I'd have to make a lot of requests from this like group or pool of resource and kind of get priority on things that I wanted. I probably wasn't as hands-on as I wanted to be. Again, I'm being very generalist in terms of like the companies that I've worked at. But when I went to Lego, or applied to Lego, I kind of knew that this was a company that focused a lot on nurturing their customer community, and so a lot of their fast-growing revenues and innovation comes from within that customer community, and in large part as a result of a huge amount of discovery work that they do. So the opportunity for me, or at least the learning, was in going to a big company, was like, I wanted to hone a particular skill set. I wanted to master the skill set. For me, it was a big thing around discovery. And then knowing that Lego does a lot of work around involving customers, children, adults alike. They have a lot of customer feedback sessions. They work on things like character development, storytelling, and feedback within all of that, meant that I would be exposed to a huge amount of opportunity that I otherwise probably at a startup wouldn't be able to kind of leverage. And specifically in terms of like the examples of the kind of things that big startups or big companies are doing at the moment, again, specifically at Lego in terms of my experience, customer feedback sessions, building inclusivity, nurturing that community, specific segments around customers, and then also, letting customers peek in behind the curtain, has all been things that I've been able to do while working at a big company. Kind of leveraging that skill set has been a big one for me.
Nice. And for you?
Cool. Yeah. So I've been working at GoCardless since May, and previous to that, I've really worked for small companies and startups. And I think so far, it's excellent. I think for me, one of the big reasons why I wanted to join GoCardless. So GoCardless has been around like kind of 13 years, so it's not quite legacy, but it's not really a scale up. Me, I wanted to go into like a bigger product-led organization. I kind of heard about this like mythical product-led orgs and was always intrigued by them. And I think the biggest benefit of having product-led org is that you get to work with amazing product people, whether it's other product managers or product leaders, or BI people, data scientists. For me, it's been such an amazing learning to have different product leaders with different experiences. Like Becki just mentioned, everyone does product differently. And then I have like different people I can go to and learn from as well. And I think as well, just having the community of product managers as well. In startups, it's normally like me and maybe like the chief product officer. And I often felt a lot of people didn't really know what I did. They thought I was like a project manager or like a developer. And I felt quite lonely at times as a PM. I think if you're a PM, it's a tough job. And I think GoCardless, what's really great is that we've got a really good community of product managers who just support you. And yeah, it's great. Like if you've had a tough day, I can like talk to my friends and talk to them about it. And it's just having that and then with that community there's lots of learning as well. We have like product management university at GoCardless, where every Wednesday we have like talks by different product managers and modules we do to really improve it. So for me it's like massive win from a learning and growth perspective.
Yeah, you touched on it a bit when we caught up before this, but you said that like the fact that it's way more structured and you can really see your growth and like the progression there and the learning you can get from just interacting with more users.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the big reasons why I joined a bigger company was, I think when you work for a startup, especially a very early one, you're a bit distracted from your outcomes as a PM. And as a PM, you know, you're trying to strive to hit very important outcomes and achieve ambitious things. But a lot of the time you're wearing multiple hats, which I think has pros as well, especially early on in your career. But like sometimes I felt like I was the office manager, the marketing manager, customer support, everything, when I was trying very hard to learn how to be a good product manager. A lot of the time and energy is spent on like building those processes, which can kind of you just kind of I felt very frustrated by it. And I also think echoing your point, Yshira, like when I've joined other startups, it's me and like the chief product officer, and there's many user problems to solve, so it's kind of like every quarter you're kind of bouncing from one problem area to another area, which you kind of want to stay with one area and really dig into it and deep dive, but I was quite constrained to doing that at smaller companies as well.
Nice. That's interesting. You both touched on like really being able to specialize.
Yeah. I like what you said about structure and tools and processes. I think in a startup, you're expected to come in and help set the foundational like tools and processes. Yeah. And I was like very intentional in wanting to come into work for a big company, not wanting to spend my time on figuring tools and processes and all of the new ways of working out. I wanted to come in and be able to do like an excellent job and focus on my work and not figure out like how I was going to be able to do that excellent job and then actually have time to even do it. For me, it was like a lot around career progression as well. I think, big companies really like value like longevity and experience. And, because it comes with things like deep subject matter knowledge and a greater emotional investment in the brand. And then, big companies who are really risk averse tend to value, those individuals with the experience, with the deep knowledge. And so you're in a better position for promotion. Because there's greater value in retaining those individuals. So career progression I would highlight as like a big thing for why I joined a startup. I saw kind of a faster path to like promotion and more senior roles. Having said that, and like I think you guys touched on it a lot. If you speak to a bunch of product managers who work at different, big companies, you're either going to get you're either going to get a response in terms of I work for a big company, big name brand appeal. It's really been a game changer in terms of like career trajectories. But you'll speak to other product managers and they'll say, well, I'm really surprised by the rigidity of process, for which is like a massive thing at big companies like Lego in particular. And actually you can even be surprised in coming in talking to things like product led at the lack of depth of product chops at some of these big companies. And so like in my opinion, I think some of these smaller companies, these lesser known companies, actually approach product in really different, more efficient ways. It's almost a little bit like of the draw. We can talk to things like, red flags when kind of interviewing for the big companies in order to find out a little bit about that. But ultimately it's about when talking to career progression, which is definitely something that I was after. It was a lot around like, what do I want right now? Am I after big name brand appeal? And in that way I can kind of leverage it for the future, or am I after like something that will, versus like seeking something that will fit, from the start. So that was like a big thing for me as well.
That's interesting that you both like touched on career progression. Is that because you felt that there'd be more seniority and like depth of experience at these large scale businesses rather than like small PM teams at startups and scale ups, where you said like progression is potentially faster because it's not as rigid and there's not as many processes, but you might get more breadth of knowledge from other people that you can learn from in like a larger PM team?
I think it's interesting because I suppose I kind of like fell into working for startups. Like I didn't really like, I don't know, people, I agree with what you're saying, Becki, like a lot of people think startups is like beer and bean bags. I just kind of ended up working for a startup without really knowing anything about startups. But I've never really thought startups were a way to like kind of progress quicker.
Yeah.
Personally, like for me, I've struggled with progression at startups, or yes, I worked for like really small startups where it's like, 4 or 5 people. I've worked for a previous company, Wonderblue, which is about 80 people, and essentially it's like me as kind of like a midweight PM, and then my manager who's kind of like the chief digital product officer. So for me, progression was very unclear, right? Because I'm not going to be the chief product officer. I mean, one day, hopefully, but not anytime soon, right? So I'd been there a couple of years. Then they were hiring like a couple of senior PMs, and which is fair enough. Maybe you need like 10 years experience, which I don't have. So it's kind of a bit like, where do I fit in here? Like, if you don't think I'm going to be a senior PM, but I've been kind of like running the show for a couple of years, like, so I'm an asset. So for me, like, yeah, I've actually found it difficult with startups, because I often find you come in, you kind of set everything up for a couple of years, and then they'll hire someone more senior, and then you report to them, which is fair enough, but you're a bit like, not sure how I feel, I'm not sure how I feel about this, like, basically set it up for you, and now you've got a senior person. So yeah, for me, I'm sure people have had better experiences for me, but I didn't really see it as like a way to fast track it. I kind of saw it more as a benefit of getting lots of hands-on experience. For me, GoCardless is like a massive benefit. What attracted me to apply is the framework of growth. It's super clear, like, how I would progress here. We have levels. My managers and like explained how I kind of get there. Have like a promotion plan. It's spoken about very openly. It's not like it's encouraged a lot.
Yeah.
Like like for my second month, they're like, we want to get you promoted. Like, how do we do this? So for me, it's like a massive benefit, because before it was very unclear. Like, am I progressing, or am I just kind of doing more but still kind of stuck at the same level?
That's really interesting. I mean, I would obviously say this is a people person, but I feel like startups end up with like a lot of people decks. They hire a people person normally when they get to about 30, so they miss a lot of that progression piece and like understanding how to
exactly
like, build themselves.
Exactly. I think it's like I said, that process thing. Like some, like where I used to work, we didn't really have HR, like a HR person, so it wasn't like enforced anywhere, like how you would actually get promoted. And then I think that can lead to just people being like, why did they get promoted? Why didn't I? Like all that kind of stuff. So it's good to have transparency.
Yeah, it's like transparency and clarity on
exactly.
I will add that, like, I've spoken a lot about like career progression framework, and probably them like that being a little bit more established. When you go into a bigger company, you expect that they have this framework in place, and that you have very clear path in terms of where you want to go. It's not always the case, and actually, well, it is one of the most frustrating things at like Lego today, is that we don't really have that in place. And so it's a very like flat structure, and we are 27 product managers, but we are all senior, and so there's no level of hierarchy in terms of maybe a more junior role, a senior role, and then even a lead role. There's nothing like that. It's very flat. I don't know that I asked the right questions to start, so I came in feeling very surprised that was the case. And sometimes there's different paths to success, right? You may end up being people lead, and you may want to follow the track of like individual contributor. Again, that needs to be specified in such a framework, and if they don't have that in place, it ends up being very unclear. So it's again very generalist. In my specific case, it's one of the more frustrating things that we bring up again to product leadership as product managers, is where is that career progression framework? Where do I go from here? And so you'll almost see like the lifespan of a product manager at Lego not being anything more than 2 years, because there's no way to progress within the company unless you go to a completely brand new role, and so they'll move out. So yeah, just one thing to highlight.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I guess some people in here might be looking for jobs, or like in that process too. What would you say are your like, I guess, green flags and red flags when looking for a new product role, and like what would you advise to specifically dig into in that interview process?
Green flag, that's a good question. Green flag.
What are they?
I think first of all, like clarity and transparency on like what the role is, what you'll be doing, and like progression. So with GoCardless, coincidentally, I used to work at a women's coding school opposite GoCardless. This is like in 2018, and so when I think about becoming a product manager, so I went to an event there, and I just thought they like seemed like a nice company to work for. So I knew about them a little bit already, but I think for me, like a green flag was before I interviewed, they kind of give you this, I don't know, like a PDF of like what we expect from product managers. Here's your interview stages. Here's what's going to happen, and like here's like how we progressed essentially. So for me, like that was impressive because normally, I don't know, I was used to startups, right? It's kind of like you show up, like you'll be doing something, like you don't really know. So for me, that was like wow, it was like really impressive. I think also talking about outcomes over output. I think this is like the correct way to do like product properly. You know, like I was in quite an output e-com place before, which you know, they're a very successful company, which isn't necessarily like a bad thing. But for me, I was very much looking for that kind of empowered, you know, like doing a proper product manager role. And a lot of it was like problem spaces. Like how would you dive into this problem? Like we had like a Miro board and an exercise, like looking into a problem space, being like, rather than, you know, what feature would you ship here? You know, jumping to a solution, which I have had an interview, being like, what would you basically come with a solution, which I thought was a bit of a red flag because I'm trying to be outcome driven. And I think green flag is also if they have like a formal learning process. Like I asked a lot about this in the interviews, and it seemed like everyone was saying the same thing. So everyone was lying, or like you know, coordinated. And what it actually was the truth. Who knows? I was like, everyone's seeing the same thing. And then I think for me, like a massive thing for me is that carrying what you said, Becki, you need a diverse and inclusive team, right? So if I'm just like getting interviewed by like all men in my interviews, I'd be like, oh great, you know, like I want some, like nothing wrong with men, but I'm just saying like you need like, I want to see like strong female leaders. So for me, like I have an amazing product lead called Charlotte now, and everyone kind of spoke about her in the interviews, and I was very excited about that, and I got interviewed by like diverse people. So for me, that was a massive green flag.
For sure.
I'd say because I've come up, I've been mistaken in the past, so I'm trying to think like good green flags. A big thing for me is around culture. I always ask a question about culture because it talks to a lot of like the values and the people and the types of communication within a company. And so I ask like, you know, what's the culture like? And if they come back with, you know, this is all the events that we host and the free drinks and the bean bags is mentioned, like this is our culture. That's a little bit of a red flag. You want to hear things like, what are the company values and how are those values communicated down, and you can kind of push for that direction in conversation, because I think it probably highlights when you talk to the things like that are not the values, or they can't always communicate or articulate the value in the best way, then that highlights things like maybe, you know, some inconsistency, there may be like high turnover, you know, product hiccups along the way, and, you know, like poor leadership. So that's one red flag I would always call out. Like I talk to the culture all the time. And then another thing I think is like related to culture as well. We mentioned it, like the you know, being able to like fail fast. I guess you have to be able to build that vulnerable culture in order to be able to create and innovate. So failing fast is an important thing, and I try to ask around things like, you know, your experimentation approach and how, because it's so important at these big companies, they don't always do it right. And so how you approach experimentation, how you're failing fast, how you are framing failure versus success, I think is like an important question. Again, because in coming in to my like the most recent position now at Lego, I think that's been a huge like mindset I've had to change, culture I've had to change, because of the way in which they do things. And so they don't frame failure very well. They only talk to the success of things, but ultimately what we want to be able to learn from all of those, the good failures. Sometimes that's more important to frame the boundaries for which we can fail within versus like the success. I think as product managers, we all know how to like talk to success. We've all probably got it splashed all over our resumes, but what we don't do really well is like, this is how we've you know, this is how we've added value because of the failures that we've helped, you know, avoid as well.
It's interesting you've all touched on that, is like embracing mistakes and like how you learn from them. It's building that psychological safety that you touched on, Becki, as well, and that like you see it builds relationships, it makes people comfortable, it like enables people to be more successful because they know that they can try things out, and that is fine. Like you got here by learning and doing things differently. Like you should for sure be able to make a few mistakes if you can be like, I learned from that. That's fine. It's not a big deal. Everyone is expected to do it.
We run something really, we do it now actually. We do something called like a graveyard session. I don't know if everyone's familiar with it, but it basically only talks around the failures of what we've done, you know, and hasn't worked out, why we stopped, how we approach the decision making, just given like full transparency as to what's gone wrong and why, and the learnings that have come out of it. And all we talk to is the failures. And even in like PRD sessions or product forums or whatever you're doing to kind of talk to wider stakeholders around the stuff that you're doing, failure tends to kind of drive more excitement than anything, like than the successes, because successes are like always really like small things that we're doing in big companies. They're driving like small numbers, but it's sometimes the failures that are like the big wins actually. So
awesome.
And just to add that, I think a really big, like, a product manager is a tough job, and I think for me it's like you need to feel safe enough to say, like, actually, like, I don't know what to do, like, and you can comfortably say that to your manager or whoever you're talking to and just say, like, I need some support here, and you don't see it as like a bad thing. You're not worried about it, and you're not like, oh, I'm going to be seen as like a massive failure, because it is a tough job. So it's like, I think for me in interviews, I've often kind of thought, like, if I had that conversation with these people, how would it go down? Like, that kind of gives me a good, like, if I feel okay about it, if I'm worried about it, I think it's probably a red flag.
Yeah. That's a good question to ask, actually. Like, if you were to make a mistake, what would, like,
and I think you pick it up as well. Like, I think you pick it up in the interviews. Yeah,
that's really interesting. Any questions from the audience at all?
Becki mentioned first, like, doing product right, and I think everyone said some version of that phrase. It sounds like at Lego and GoCardless there's a lot of that happening, but are there specific areas where you're kind of almost consciously making a compromise, or if that's too strong a word, like areas that you feel like you are working around that are kind of that are tricky maybe to kind of coexist with that notion of doing product right, which is amorphous in itself?
So Lego are very much guided by the potential of products, which is great. We are product led in a sense, and it's probably one of the big reasons as to why I went to Lego. I thought this is the company to know how to do product right, and I mentioned that, like, their discovery process and their customer innovation, their customer experience strategy is incredible. It's next level. How they like nurture that customer community. But there's been there's had to have been compromise along the way, because you realize very quickly that they're not doing things to the most efficient way, and so we're not doing dual track delivery and discovery as we should, and discovery ends up being several weeks as we show multiple iterations of like high fidelity prototypes to customers, only to then go on an A/B test, so it can be months before we get any quantitative data. And then can we actually act on all of that data? Like, it's just, we're not there yet. That's kind of the compromise I'm having to make at the moment. And I spoke to like the cultural shift I'm having to make within the teams as well. It's that level of like lean experimentation and doing things in a faster way, so that we're avoiding all of that wasted development, but at the same time still being product led. Like, that's my compromise today. I haven't reached it as yet, because I'm struggling with like the mindset of like, how do we still represent Lego brand, this beloved brand, but at the same time show something that may be not of as like high standard or quality to users in order to get those initial insights. That's my compromise at the moment.
Well, that's a really good question. Like, I genuinely don't feel like I have to. I think I'm very fortunate. I don't think like all PMs would say this at GoCardless. Some with like a fintech, there's some stuff you just have to build, like bank rails and stuff like that. So I think probably a compromise there is like some stuff you just have to do. But no, I feel very empowered in the team I am. Like, I think we are probably because GoCardless is like way smaller than Lego, but like we can like experiment quite quick, and you know everyone's quite like they've got lots of good experience with it, and I do feel like I was saying that having that safety. My manager is very much like, if you don't agree with something, like say it. Like you don't need to worry about being less, you know, senior, or if you don't agree with the way we're doing something, just like if you have good reasons, obviously have to like have good reasons, and like justify it. Couldn't just be like, I don't like this, you know. Have to have like a good like a good reason, a good argument. It's very much like I will just say it. Like I feel like I'm empowered and confident enough within my team to do that. So.
Good level of safety.
Yeah, definitely.
Like. Yeah. Who else had questions or some? Yeah.
This is maybe more relevant to Yshira and Becki, but
Mm-hmm.
what problems you come into, like maybe issues day to day, but also through like hiring? Do you have working for a company that has the perception of being like physical product rather than digital first?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So what issues do you have working for like a product, I suppose, has a perception of being like a physical product, like telecommunications or Lego, as opposed to something that is like digital first, and that's their sole like revenue generating, something like GoCardless, for example. Does that make sense?
I think so. I'm going to do my best to answer it, and you can tell me if it's wrong. So I've actually worked in both hardware products and digital products. Hardware, when I talk about like consumer electronics, obviously there is a digital element there as well. I think the perception piece is interesting because hardware obviously takes a lot longer to build. It tends to be a very waterfall product cycle, and that brings with it some complexities when you add over the digital layer. So I've worked in IoT, for example, where you've got that parallel track. It's difficult. I think it comes down to, you know, what are the structures that you have in place in order to kind of parallel track some of those things. How do you set up and scale your team so that you have expertise on both sides? And also, how can you communicate that? And how can you communicate those struggles and some of those challenges to the people around you? Whether that be key stakeholders, management, structures, you know, timelines, things like that. The line obviously in product is always, you know, how do I get it cheaper, how do I get it faster? And that can't always be true when you deal with hardware. So for me, it's around building the appropriate processes in place, being able to create structures that build on that transparency, and then also being able to communicate that in a way that lands and resonates. I don't think it's fair to say that one is necessarily faster to revenue than another, because it all depends on the scale and kind of the type of the product and what it is, the ecosystem that you're kind of building and delivering in. I don't know if that quite answers.
It does, yeah.
Okay, good.
Any more for any more? Oh yeah. Danielle.
Hi, I'm Danielle. Nice to meet everyone. Becki and Ben, you touched on this earlier about the importance of building diverse product teams and psychological safety. And then Serena, you touched on this as well, about the importance of having a diverse team or a diverse hiring panel. So what would be nice to know from everyone, in your own opinions, is like how important is diversity in the hiring process and building product teams?
I can.
Yeah,
It's like it's known that diverse teams build better products. So if you want to build the best product, you should have a diverse team. You have like more range of thought. You have more experience. If you want to build the best thing, you should have a diverse team behind it. And it's similar. There's like we sometimes come against it is like user research, like even getting that diverse too to understand who the people are going to be connecting with the product. And we're starting to do that with like inclusive design standards, green creds, accessibility standards, to ensure what we're building is best for a lot of people rather than one specific usual metric that it's been for a while.
Yeah, and I would say you've nailed the answer. I would flip the question slightly, which is if anyone's looking for a job, I think, Serena, you've already seen, if the interview panel is all one set of people, that should be, we were talking about red flags and green flags, that should be one. I think the other thing to think about is, now every company has a D&I statement.
Yeah.
Therefore, when you go into an interview process, I think Serena, you talked about red flags and green flags. A good question to ask your manager is, hey, like I've read your D&I statement, what does that mean to you?
Yeah.
Because everybody is versed in the D&I statement. You want to know from the manager what that means to them.
You would hope so.
And kind of in their own words, because believe me, we've had candidates interview, ask the manager goes, well, you know, D&I, but, you know, always hire the right person, which to me would be a massive red flag. Because what do you mean? What, you don't think D&I is hiring the right person?
Yeah.
So, like, it's a really good question to ask. So it's not quite answering your question, but I think it's a really important question for anyone to ask in an interview. Certainly if you want to know your manager. You like
Pegs agrees, yeah.
I'd also add to that as well, diversity of thought is also extremely important. I think, you know, when we talk about diversity, it kind of goes to the, you know, this is perhaps the wrong phrasing, but kind of the usual subjects for diversity. I will also say, and I have been guilty of this myself, we're talking about failures, we're talking about graveyards, is hiring in your image, right? And how do you as kind of a hiring manager make sure that you're not just offering a role to someone because you kind of see a little you in them and you feel like that's easy, right? And they'll fit culturally because they're just like me, and you know, and I can grow them into be me, and you know, and as a hiring manager, that's something, you know, I deal with, and I you know, I'll be honest, I struggle with, because it's the natural kind of place, right? So I think it's how can you build teams that are diverse in every single way, and I think, you know, it starts with kind of the basics, and then how can you build off from there. But it is extremely important, because you're right, you know, and especially if you're working for a legacy business, you build for global scale. How can you be expected to build for global scale if you are only representing a small proportion of the world?
I mean, I literally could talk about this for like ever, but like, I think I agree. Like, I think when unfortunately, like, diversity and inclusion often, like, not unfortunately, but you think of people, right? But I think as a product manager, I feel very strongly that you are making this product for your users, right? And the requirement is that users can use your product. So I think you just mentioned like the different frameworks to do with inclusivity and diversity. And I think unfortunately in product management, these are not. Diversity is kind of seen as a passion. I've often seen, you're really passionate about diversity and inclusion, which I just kind of roll my eyes at, because it's actually a skill to sit there and say, how can I make sure I'm including the right users in this research? How can we build something that is inclusive? Is a skill. Just in the way you would do like discovery is a skill. And I think that's something when I wish I got asked about in interviews, because I've read books and I've read courses, you know, I've done courses on these things, but unfortunately it's not really embedded in our practices yet. But for me, like to ask people that in the interviews, like, have you heard of these, I don't know, like WCAG3 frameworks? Have you read, Building for Everyone by Google? To me, that is beyond impressive. I would be like, this is a product team who really knows how to build inclusively, and they're not just interested in, I don't know, like your ethnicity or whatever. So for me, I think asking those questions, I've never had it. I'd be like beyond impressed if someone ever asked me about that. And like what I do, ask those questions to teams, and most of the time they have no idea what I'm talking about. So it'd be great to see. I would love to see that in a hiring process, especially as PMs. I think it should be part of our role.
And I'd say like sometimes you will have non-diverse hiring panels, like size of business, like if they're very early stage, sometimes it does happen. That is kind of usual. But like asking questions like that actually sees, like, they might not be diverse visibly how you can see them, but if they care about it or if they are interested in it, that shows you that it's probably going to be a good place for you to join, from like the psychological safety, trust, knowing what you believe and know that the mission is cared about. So even if it doesn't seem visible, you can actually get green flags from like asking the right questions.
I think that'd be a huge green flag, because I think you could easily, just be like blag it and be like, D&I, like you just said, say some nonsense. You know,
it's like how you live it.
Exactly. You could just be like inclusivity, dumb. Like, but if you know your stuff, I think it's so impressive.
Nice. Any other questions? No. One final question to all of you. Like, what are you most excited about for this year? Like, as you grow your team, say, and then as like your learning opportunities. These large-scale businesses. I don't know who wants to go first.
I mean, I can start, because mine isn't product related, so I can start and you can get on to I guess I'm most excited about, last year was a very difficult market for anyone to hire that wasn't one of the top tech startups with a hell of a lot of money. So I'm quite excited about this year that it's going to be more, it's going to be a great chance for BT and GoCardless and Lego to kind of like to really try and get their brands out there and talk about products and how they do it. Whereas last year it's very, very difficult to hire unless you're one of the top startups with a lot of money. So I'm really looking forward to more conversations like this, more great companies getting their values and their brand and their companies out there.
I think for me, it's around the innovation that I can see starting to happen this year. I mean, it's a known fact that in an economic downturn, you start to see more innovation come to life. And we're seeing that with what we're doing, various kind of implications to budgets and those kinds of things within big corporates, which obviously you are subject to, means that we're swarming specific initiatives and we're being hyper-focused and laser-focused on those outcomes and not on output. And so I'm really excited to see not only what we can do and what we can launch to the world as a relatively new kind of business unit within the business, but also what is else going to happen in externally that means that we can take advantage of that. So that for me is what I'm most excited about.
Awesome.
I suppose similar to Becki. This is the first time I'm kind of like leading my own team and like also trying to foster safety in my team, and I think it's the first time I'm in like an outcome driven product team. I'm just very excited to continue growing and hopefully lead to some success.
Okay.
I think so. We've spent the better part of like the last year implementing things like OKR processes and heavy planning cycles, and as we move towards being we too are under this digital transformation, so moving towards being more like product led, and so there has been that implementation part of it that's happened like the last year. So I'm most looking forward to become a little more hyper focused, as you mentioned, on some of these initiatives in order to drive the outcomes that we've been so heavily planning for, and to focus on some of like our North Star metrics and being able to measure true value, and I'm excited about taking that planning to like also the next level and really being able to kind of cut out the noise a little bit, both of planning and things like all of the data that's coming in, and just really be hyper focused on some some interesting initiatives that are coming out and true value that we can bring.
Wicked. Well, thanks so much for joining us, and a big thanks to all of our speakers. They kindly said they're happy to stick around for a couple minutes if you have any questions that you didn't want to stick your hand up for. So feel free to grab them if you'd like. But big thanks and lovely to see you all.